I'm going to introduce our brother Roger Lamb, how God is using his family story, his personal story to understand the stewardship, the wealth. And Roger, now he has a new job. He's the author and speaker. And Roger, his recent book, Lost and Found, Money vs. Riches, shares the candid and powerful story of his difficult and abusive relationship with money and the transformation which has emerged in recent years. And formerly a managing director at both CIMB and Royal Bank of Scotland, Roger is living in Hong Kong with his wife, Sylvia. I see Sylvia is here, and I see even Pastor Steve is here. And thank you for praying for Roger. And so, Roger, welcome here and to share your story. Thank you, my brother.
Good morning. Thank you, Mark, for your kind introduction. I attended last year's celebration of generosity in Macau, and I hosted a jog in November. It's still a bit surreal to me that I've been given the opportunity to share my journey with you. So thank you, Daryl and J. Paul, for taking a risk on me. So much has happened in my life since attending the COG last year. But before I go into the largest impact stories, let me give you a bit of background of what I've been through in my life that's been intertwined with a struggle of money. My name is Roger Lamb, and I've been in the banking and finance industry for the past 24 and a half years. I'm a fourth-generation Christian and had a great childhood. My grandfather co-founded a church, and he established a very well-known paint brand in Hong Kong many decades ago. I went to the right schools, was on a number of winning teams in speech, music, and sports, and even starred in a few TV commercials as a kid. I definitely had a chip on my shoulder, feeling I had the world at my feet, and I always assumed that when I grew up, I would work for the family business. My world turned upside down when I was 13 years old. My grandfather was possibly an overly generous man, giving my dad, who was running the business for him, only 10% of the shares in the company. My nightmare started when my granduncle and his sons, who collectively had more shares than my dad, brought in a high-profile PRC businessman to launch a hostile takeover on the family business. My dad fought valiantly for a year, but he narrowly lost out to the other party in the end, and he was forced to tender his shares at a very poor valuation. Even though I was only 14 years old at the time, I was painfully aware, down to the last penny, how much money my dad had in the account. He felt there was nothing left for him to do in Hong Kong, so he moved our family to Vancouver in Canada. I was extremely angry about losing my birthright and leaving Hong Kong on exile. I wanted revenge really badly, but because I had no other special skills of any commercial value, I decided that I had to excel in academics in order to make a lot of money and to make a name for myself. Logically, it meant going to a good private school. But because my dad didn't have any consistent income stream, my younger sister and I ended up going to our local public school. I had developed a serious insecurity over provision, and I felt I could only rely on myself from that point onwards. To make matters even worse, a well-meaning family friend suggested that because academic standards were perceived to be higher in Hong Kong than in Vancouver, my sister and I both skipped a grade. So here's a really angry kid, just lost his birthright, had to leave Hong Kong on exile. Even though English language was not an issue, I have one more problem now. I'm a year younger than everyone else in this new environment. My personality became unhealthily competitive and combative, and I was fueled by fear and anger to achieve success. For all the Star Wars fans out there, the Jedi Master Yoda said, "Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering." That kind of negative energy-based drive got me into an Ivy League school, and I kept getting really good grades. But my emotional quotient was incredibly distorted. I applied for 50 jobs out of college, but I got dinged by 49 of them. Most of the employers were smart enough to seem to have figured out that there's something wrong with this kid. I think by the final round of job interviews in a couple of opportunities, they sensed that I was not going to fit in to their training programs. The only job offer I got was in Chicago. I had a vague idea about what trading was about, but I certainly had no idea what a hedge fund was. It turned out to be the job with the highest starting salary for all Cornell undergrads in 1993. So even though I was a million miles away from God, He had always been looking out for me. Looking back, it was relatively smooth sailing in the first 10 years of my career in terms of getting paid and promoted, which was of utmost importance to me at the time. My Christian faith was pure head knowledge only. I had moved back to Hong Kong since the end of 1994, and by 2002, I started attending community church in Hong Kong. And there I ran into an ex-colleague from the mid-90s at a Swiss bank. She would ask me every time I see her the same question, and that is, "Would you come to my life group?" And I would only politely smile at her and decline, but at the back of my head, I would be thinking, "Lady, you have absolutely no idea what you're asking me. There is no way whatsoever that I'm going to come to your life group." Two events happened in 2003 that were, how should I say it? If they didn't happen simultaneously as a 1-2 punch in my stomach, I definitely won't be standing here speaking to you today. Number one, I was passed over for promotion to managing director, and I ended up having to report to a peer who was based in Singapore. And secondly, I was dating this lady at the time very seriously, and I had even picked out the engagement diamond. But out of the blue, at least to me, she decided to call off our relationship. So as a 1-2 punch, I felt really, really low. I've never felt that awful before. And that Sunday, I went to church, and guess who I ran into? That same lady that I worked with from the mid-90s. And guess what she asked me? "Will you come to my life group?" Well, the difference this time is I just felt like I'm down the pits. There's nothing worse could possibly happen to me. So I think even to her surprise, I said, "Okay, where is it? When is it? I'll be there. You're on." And once I started attending life group, a few things jumped out at me immediately. One, these guys are no saints either. Two, they're not the judgmental type of people that I had feared originally. And three, I actually know the Bible better than some of them. Probably from all the years of Sunday school that I've attended. So, in hindsight, it was God's gentle wake-up call for me to draw near to him again. And what I also realized is that church is not a sanctuary for saints, but a hospital for sinners. From then on, I spent a lot of time taking courses like Alpha and Cleansing Stream, attending the Walk to Emmaus, and serving in a number of ministries at church. After I became generous with my time and my talent with God, he then moved on to teach me about being generous with my money. I would say that God had taught me 3 major lessons in the area of money. And these lessons happen sequentially, and it just happens to fit into one verse. It's not a verse that you would normally associate with stewardship or money, but as I share it with you, I think you will agree with me that there's an uncanny kind of juxtaposed opportunity here. And by the way, I must be a really slow learner because God took 10 years to teach me these 3 things in this one verse. That verse is Micah 6:8, which I'm sure is familiar with many of you. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So the first lesson is to act justly with respect to the area of money. The first full-length sermon I heard on tithing was back in 2005, and this is basically 2 years after I've gone to Life Group and attended a lot of courses and started spending a lot of time serving in ministries. I'm a bit ashamed to admit that at that point, I was not deliberately following any particular teaching in the Bible, in any area of my life. So it's rather an unusual decision to start following biblical teaching in the area of money first, which for most people, it's the last area of surrender. There are a couple of reasons, possibly, that why I made that decision. First, back in 2005, investment banking compensation was good. 2, I was still single and living with my parents, so didn't have to pay rent. I didn't have a mortgage. And 3, I was not married yet, so didn't have a family of my own to support, and no kids, no tuition fees to pay. But I think most importantly, my pastor at the time, he encouraged he didn't encourage. He said, he quoted Malachi 3:10, and that said, this is probably the only area, the only time God has said that you can test him, which means that you can kind of go at your own pace and then just kind of see what happens. So I was encouraged by that flexibility. So immediately I filled out an auto-pay form and I put down 1% on my base salary. Okay, so that month went by. It didn't move the needle. I didn't feel the pain. That was okay. Then, let's change the auto-pay instruction again. I moved it to 2%. Next month went by. No pain. So I changed the auto-pay instruction again, this time to 5%. Still no impact. So by the 4th month, as you can probably guess, I moved it to 10%. And at that point, I was patting myself on the shoulder, saying, Roger, you have arrived. You're now tithing. And then a couple months later came bonus season. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? Bonuses back then were multiple months and even sometimes years of compensation. So, and the formulas were sometimes a bit complex. Some parts were upfront cash, but then it also came with some unvested shares and some options. So to cut a long story short, it took me 2 years to grapple with this issue, and I ended up tithing in full, whether it's cash, shares, or vested or unvested. And if anything, at that point, I had a little bit of a muddled prosperity gospel thinking in my head, thinking that, okay, God, if I tithe even the invested portion now, surely you're going to bless the share price so it doesn't end up dropping. That's clearly not the case. And also, one more thing, I didn't see the logic in playing accounting games with God, because he knows everything anyway, so I definitely couldn't hide from him. So what I learned after 2 years is that in money terms, to act justly towards God is to not rob him on tithes and offerings. And this is from Malachi 3:8. Now, just as I thought I've arrived, now tithing in full, after 2 years of training, God has a great sense of humor. Every time I think I've arrived, he would show me the next lesson or the next leg of the journey to me. The second lesson is to love mercy with respect to the area of money. In 2007, one Sunday after church, my then senior pastor asked me to meet someone. It was an individual that I was familiar with but didn't know very well. It turned out that this person had a bit of a money issue. This person borrowed about 3 years of his wages from a loan shark in Hong Kong. And the issue that he was facing is that if he couldn't repay in full in 72 hours, then the loan shark threatened bodily harm to him. I was thinking that this is not the type of issue that you could resolve by circulation by email to a committee to then decide on whether to save someone's life, literally. And I also thought that God must have a point for the pastor to ask me to meet with this individual. At that point, I had saved up a bit of margin, so I had the ability to help him. And just looking this person in the eye, his helplessness, I couldn't justify how walking away. Now, I didn't know the Old Testament all that well at the time, but what I structured and proposed to him would have fit perfectly in the Old Testament. But first, I asked him a few due diligence questions. The first one is this for drugs? He said no. Second question, was this for a gambling habit? He said no. Last question, and probably the most important, is this the whole amount? He said yes. So what I proposed to him was I will give him the money in full, up front. I will charge him 0 interest, and I will give him 60 monthly installments to pay me down on this amortizing loan. I asked him, is this affordable to you? Would you be able to, is this comfortable to you? He said yes, and he thanked me for it. And I thought, this is great. My only downside is, I thought, foregoing the opportunity cost in investing in this money, but I save a life. I'm sure I'd be racking up a lot of bonus points in heaven. So, it's still a good trade. For the first year, the repayments took, it was like clockwork. Every first Sunday of the month, he would come up, give me an envelope, and the repayments there. But starting from the 13th month, it started to slow a little bit. He skipped the next month, and then the envelope wouldn't come till the 15th month. And then he would skip 2 months, and then so on and so forth. And you see the pattern. So basically, after the second year, then the repayments kind of stopped altogether. It gave me so much food for thought in terms of how I should think about this, how I should feel about this, and what I should do about this. If I had done this on street terms, I know what I would have done. But I did this at church in front of my senior pastor, so I can't apply street rules. And then I just started thinking, given that's a situation, can I even approach him? Can I even talk to him about this, or should I just wait silently and pretend that everything's okay? Am I even allowed to feel angry about this? And then in the end, I became more familiar with the parable of the unmerciful servant in Matthew chapter 18. And I saw a lot of parallels in that parable. I saw myself as the king's servant who owed him literally $1 trillion in gold. And this person owed me just a few silver coins, relatively speaking. So I had no right to choke him, because if I did that, bad things would happen to me. So that was that's a conclusion I came to, and our relationship was a little bit strained, and I would confess that it's not my doing, but this person just basically avoided eye contact at church, and I can sort of understand that. A few years later, one day, just out of the blue, I heard this voice. This question just popped into my head. When did you first grant that loan? And I actually tried to answer that question. I said 2007. That was in year 2014 when this question popped in my head. And at that point, I've come to read and understand the Old Testament a little bit better. And I knew exactly why the Holy Spirit had asked me that question. It was the year of debt forgiveness. So I decided that, well, this is clearly not just a suggestion. This is God telling me, reminding me that about debt forgiveness. And to be honest, I mean, in earthly terms, it's been non-performing for so long. I mean, I've kind of written it off anyways. So I gladly approached this person and I said, brother, it's canceled. Let's just rip up the deal. But he said to me, it's better late than never. Your money's good with me. Your money's good with me. And to be honest, he ended up blessing me in a lot of ways, including some unexpected monetary ways, which I'm not going to go into, given the time constraint. So 2014, I learned to tithe, and I learned to hand out a zero-interest loan to those in need. And when it comes to the year of debt forgiveness, I learned to rip up the ticket. So I thought, Roger, you've definitely arrived now. And God And God, once again, he shows to me his humorous side. Then I get to learn the third lesson, which is to walk humbly with my God in the area of money. I knew that I had not come to financial serenity and peace almost right after I forgave that debt. I was on Christmas break in 2014, and I had a bout of panic disorder. And the reason for my anxiety was money. And the reason for that is, well, a couple-fold. One is my income had dropped significantly from 2005 when I first started to tithe in full. Now, I cannot blame God for my financial troubles because the tithe is proportional to my income, and I kept adjusting it according to my income. So definitely God is not to blame. But the issue was there were a lot of people, including my parents and grandmother, that I had been supporting all these years, just because of my level of income has dropped. I didn't want to pass on that to them, so I held my giving to them on dollar terms the same as it was before. And that created the problem of making my outgoings on a monthly basis more than my income. So I was running on negative cash flow every month. And by December, there was definitely a little bit of a hole on a cash flow basis. And I prayed, asking God to give me a bonus that year to cover the shortfall. And he did. The bonus for that year just basically precisely covered the shortfall that I incurred in 2014. But I thought, this cannot be a good way to live. This cannot be what God wants for me going forward. And just to give you a little bit more color on the level of the income trajectory. Basically, my total compensation was higher in 1997, when I was a 25-year-old, than 2017. So it's been a very, very steep drop. Coincidentally, the stewardship committee at Community Church decided to bring in more stewardship courses to the congregation. So we brought in the Crown Financial course in February 2015. Jeff Ryan over there, he was the guest facilitator for our first course, for our first lesson, and the pin dropped after the first verse that he quoted at the first lesson on where and why I went wrong all along. The verse that Jeff quoted was Psalm 24, verse 1, which essentially says, the earth and everything that's in it, it belongs to God. My problem was that I was on a flawed revenue split model with God. The first 10 is yours. The other 90, how I save it, spend it, invest it, prepare for my retirement, and so on and so forth, that is my business. Thank you very much. There is nothing dumber than to do that, to carry it all on my own shoulders. Everything belongs to God, and let me tell you, it became the most soothing kind of thought, because it all belongs to Him, and there are so many promises in the Bible that He will take care of me, and that He is the God who provides. He is Jehovah Jireh. I never thought I would ever say this, but I thank God for lowering my income so that I can learn self-sacrifice by spending money on myself, on ratcheting down to a less extravagant lifestyle, and deriving more joy in the process. Since it took a span of 10 years for God to teach me these 3 lessons, God has taken me on a few recent adventures on my own journey to generosity, which sequentially works out in the order of small, medium, and large, in terms of dollar amount only, but certainly not on meaning or insignificance. Now, in terms of the timing of these events, now earlier when I started, I mentioned about the impact that that last year's celebration of generosity had on me. I am pleased to report that both the medium event and the large event both took place after the COG in Macau. These 3 stories all share one commonality, and that is hearing God's voice and then doing it. First, the small dollar amount adventure. One Sunday at church, the seat on my right was empty, and then this guy came in kind of late, and I've never seen him before. He looked exactly like Kenny G, and he even brought a saxophone case with him, but I'm sure he's not Kenny G. There was another thing that caught my eye about this gentleman. Once Pastor Steve started to preach a sermon, he brought out his Bible, and it is the most underlined Bible I've ever seen. There's so much notes written all over the margin. It's a miracle that anyone could read from it. So I'm somewhat musical myself, so I thought, I made it a point to introduce myself to him after the service. And after learning that he is indeed a professional saxophone player, and that he had recently lost his gig on a cruise ship, and he's just spending an undetermined amount of time in Hong Kong, I decided to introduce him to the worship team, thinking that the worship band could definitely use an additional professional saxophone player to jazz up the music. And I brought him over to the band, and they started talking, and then I heard this voice. 3 simple words: give him money. I knew that was from God, so I stepped aside, and then I looked in my wallet, opened just to see how much cash I had on me. I had 2 500 Hong Kong dollar notes on me, which is approximately 128 US dollars. So I had 3 options. 1, ignore the voice of God. 2, give him half of what I had on me. Or the last option, give him everything I had to a complete stranger. I picked the last option. After I made that decision, I walked back to the band and to Kenny G. I said, "Excuse me, sir. Can we step aside? There's something I want to talk to you about." And then I talked to him a little bit more, found out a little bit more about his background. He's originally from Los Angeles, and that at the moment he was just playing the saxophone somewhere in Central and trying to make money that way. And then I gave him the 2 $500 notes. And then I asked him, so what brought you to our church today? I haven't seen you before. He said, I came to this church this morning because God told me that someone was going to give me money here. A shiver ran up my spine. Not only then, also just now. I was humbled and stunned at the same time in being part of this miracle. And if it weren't for my obedience, it wouldn't have happened, possibly. So that's story number one. I've never seen this gentleman since, so he could have been an angel for all I know. Now we're on to the medium dollar amount adventure. Some of you may have heard of a gentleman by the name of Kenneth Bae. If you're not familiar with him, he's a Korean American pastor who's been jailed in North Korea for close to 2.5 years. He got released, and beginning of last year, I had the privilege of meeting him when he came to speak at our church. And my wife Sylvia and I had the privilege of leading worship that Sunday, and we were extremely touched by what he went through and his story. He came back to Hong Kong in May last year, and a brother at church organized a small group dinner, and Kenneth talked to us about his new initiative, the Nehemiah Global Institute, to care for the people in North Korea and to care for the country. As he was speaking about this during dinner, I heard another voice, the same voice now dinner was in Hong Kong. Now if I were to hear a dollar amount, it should be in Hong Kong dollars, right? But no, I heard a very specific US dollar amount. When I heard it, my gut reaction was, Lord, no, please, this is not for me to bear. It was a very uncomfortable amount, and it would have added another 18% of my annual base salary, in addition to tithe and givings and parental support, grandparental support, and da-da-da-da-da. And that year, I had absolutely zero expectations of getting any bonus at the year end. So I kept quiet during dinner. I didn't mention it to anybody, not even my wife. But I did ask Kenneth this question during dinner. I said, if there were to be a relatively sizable donation, now I have nothing against PayPal, but instead of going through PayPal, is there any other method which would save you some commission dollars? And he said, yes, we have a bank account opened in South Korea. One could probably do a direct transfer to our account. And I asked him one more thing. Do you have any idea how much you need to raise at the moment? He said, I have absolutely no idea. So I thought, okay, let's see how this develops. 2 months later, an email came from the person who organized dinner. It came with detailed plans on what Nehemiah Global Institute was planning to do, so on and so forth. And guess what other information was contained in the email? It contained a very specific US dollar amount, and that amount was exactly the same as what I had heard 2 months ago at dinner. Then it confirmed that I had to see to it that this amount was raised. So I immediately started a WhatsApp group with the other dinner participants. There were 5 families present at dinner, and I'm so glad that one gentleman suggested that we would divvy up the amount 5 ways and get it done. I was extremely pleased to hear that, and I was the first to to go ahead with the payment. For reasons that I'm not going to reveal, direct wire transfer became the only viable method for this donation. Of course, I could go through PayPal, but I didn't want to do that. There were two issues with going this route. First is there's no tax deduction from a Chapter 88 standpoint from a Hong Kong inland revenue perspective, but that's not a big deal. That's just basically a 15% rebate. That's okay. I can live with that. The second was much more serious, at least I felt at the time. Going direct to a South Korean bank account that's associated with Kenneth Bae, who's been jailed in North Korea, I thought it could introduce an element of personal risk. I'm sure his every move is being monitored by North Korea. So I prayed, and I emerged with a sense of peace that if this were going to be the part of the guaranteed persecution package that every Christian was destined to face, then so be it. It reminded me of 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12 to 16. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but just excerpts of it. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ. So, as I mentioned, I transferred my portion of 1/5 the amount immediately. And in the interest of time, I'm going to spare you all the nitty-gritty details because it was a journey that spanned over 2 months, and you can probably imagine how many back and forth WhatsApp messages and emails there were. But in the end, I gave the full amount that I heard at dinner. And because subsequent to the email that we received, the budget was increased to do a few more things. It took 2 other brothers and sisters to fulfill their commitment to meet the enlarged budget for Nehemiah Global Institute. I was foolish to think God was going to give me an easy way out of the number that was clearly earmarked for me. I've learned to not nickel and dime God, but to just do as I'm told. Also, I learned a very important lesson in that I'm not the only game in town, as it took 2 other brothers and sisters it took their faithfulness to meet the need in full in the end. So here comes the big one. I would call it pledge, liquidate, and bring to the altar. The preliminary idea of community church buying our own premises was first tossed around beginning of last year. I wanted to contribute in a significant way, but looking at my cash balances initially, I worked out a number that what I felt at the time was already sacrificial giving. However, I later worked out the numbers. It would have meant that every family unit in the church would have to give the same sacrificial giving amount in order for us to buy a place in the most expensive real estate on the planet, which meant it's unrealistic. So I started to look at the other assets that I had besides cash. It's kind of like the moment when God said to Moses, "What's in your hand?" There's one particular investment that became my best performing investment ever, and and by default, it became the largest also. And I felt that it still has a lot of legs on it to really skyrocket. As the company, when I originally bought it, it was just a 3D graphics chip company that focused on gaming. But it evolved into the proxy for the growth in artificial intelligence. So when I bought it during the tech bubble, it was $10. When I started to look at it in terms of pledging, it had already gone up to $100. So it had already gone up 10 times. But in my mind, I really thought it had the potential to go up to 1,000. So the deal I made with God was as follows. Lord, I'm going to take half the position size from $100 upwards, wherever and whenever I crystallize the gains, that I will bring to the altar for the church premises. So it had the potential to one day maybe even pay for the down payment for the church premises if it really goes to 1,000. Every now and then I would think about how much that would carve out of my net worth, but I would be quickly reminded by the Holy Spirit about Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 18, that essentially everything that I have, God gave me the ability to have it, to earn it. And funnily, the next verse I'm going to quote. This is what Pastor Brett just spoke on this morning. 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 24. I'm not going to give anything that doesn't cost me anything. So after I made this pledge, I just let the stock run, and it basically started to do really well again. But on February 2nd this year, it was a Friday. That day, the Dow Jones closed by dropping 666 points. So besides the unholy number, I felt really disturbed. The Federal Reserve was talking about raising interest rates more imminently and possibly on a faster pace than what people had been expecting. And because I've been in the markets long enough, it kind of reminded me of 1994 when there was similar dynamics in the market, when I was a junior trader and I lost my shirt on it. So I felt very agitated, and I prayed throughout Saturday, God, what should I do? What should I do? Should I sell? What should I do? But I got no answer. It disturbed me so much that I slept very poorly Saturday night, and I almost skipped church on Sunday. But I had this nudge to go to church. And my pastor, Steve Galtney, when he preached, he said, when God speaks to you, normally it's in a very soft voice, and the words are typically very simple. Immediately after he said that, I heard the word sell. I literally heard the word sell. I didn't want to, base this important decision on this one, this one word I heard. I had to, make sure that it's from God, so on and so forth, because it's such an important decision. After church, Sylvia got the kids a couple of tickets for a kids show, and I opted not to go. I drove them there, so I had about an hour to do my quiet time after I parked on the curb. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my daily quiet time routine. It's one chapter from the Old Testament, one chapter from the New Testament, one psalm, and the Proverbs of the day, meaning the chapter which corresponds to the date. Proverbs has 31 chapters, which conveniently there's one for every day. So the day I read it was Sunday, February 4th. So for the Proverbs of the day would have been Proverbs 4. Now, I've been reading the NIV for years and years and years, so I must have read Proverbs 4 40, 50 times. But coincidentally, beginning of this year, I decided that maybe it's time to read another translation to see if I would get more out of it. Then I changed to the Message. So that day I was reading Proverbs 4 from the Message. Now, the version that I've read dozens and dozens and dozens of times in NIV is Proverbs chapter 4, verse 5. It says, "Get wisdom, get understanding." In the Message, it's translated as "sell everything and buy wisdom." So it's not just a word that I heard audibly at least twice before, but now even with the written word, I'm a bag lady style investor who only buys and never sells anything, no matter if the investment is good or not. The last time I sold a single share of stock was in 2006. So after the quiet time, I became 100% resolute that I'm going to liquidate everything on Monday. Now, whether that's a smart thing to do from an earthly perspective, I'm definitely not sure. But I thought, well, at least it's a sign of obedience. God tells you in not just once, but in two different forms. I felt I've just got to do it. So Monday morning, I called my banker. I said, "Hey, McKeel, have you ever seen me sell anything?" He said, "No." I said, "Okay, today we're going to do something different. We're going to sell everything." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes." So starting in the morning, sold everything in Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Vietnam. I said, "Okay, let's regroup at 3 p.m. For Europe." 3 p.m., I sold UK, France, Switzerland, and then I said, "What's the number for the U.S. night dealer?" And that's where the largest position was. It was a U.S. listed stock on the NASDAQ. So long story short, I finished selling absolutely everything by 11 p.m. Monday night. I went to sleep. I saw it as an act of obedience. It could backfire on me from a mark-to-market perspective, but I thought, well, at least I obeyed God. At least I could say that to myself. I went to bed, and the next day when I woke up, my first prayer was, "God, please help me to not feel stupid if the stocks had continued to go up from my exit levels." I get out of bed, I get my phone, and then I was shocked. The Dow Jones had closed down 1,500 points that day. Now, clearly, the point wasn't about optimal exit from a price perspective, because for those who follow the markets, it subsequently rebounded. But it saved me from a lot of anxiety from the interest rate situation, from the trade tariff situation, from the Russia investigation situation, from Syria, you name it, from North Korea, you name it. So to this day, I'm still wondering what the point, what God's intention was for me to do all that. But one thing definitely emerged very clearly. Soon it dawned on me that the gains that I had pledged to God for the church premises, they were realized. They're now sitting in my account. Shortly afterwards, one day, during quiet time, I read this. It was from Psalm, and it's from NIV. Make vows to the Lord your God and fulfill them. Let all the neighboring lands bring gifts to the one to be feared. And there's examples in Acts chapter 5, the first few verses of it, in the form of Ananias and his wife Sapphira, and the untimely death that happened to them. So to save myself and Sylvia, I knew that this money could not sit in my account any longer. The timing of my gift coincided with church council independently deciding to go ahead, not so much with definitely buying a property, but at least to have a family conversation, to go to the congregation and do a consultation session with all our family members on the premises initiative, which may be the real point of God telling me to sell that day. If the Kenneth Bay amount was painful, this was 15 times Kenneth Bay in terms of the amount. So so it's really small, large, and supersized maybe. And through this episode, God had helped me to go from cash flow-based giving mindset to an asset sale or balance sheet-based giving mindset. My department at work unexpectedly shut down since end of October last year, and my gardening leave period has ended in January. I'm now sitting on just money market returns only, as God hasn't told me what to invest in, despite my frequent prayers. There's only uncertainty ahead of me. But I'm feeling more confident than ever because I've seen and experienced the goodness and faithfulness of Jehovah Jireh, the God who provides. Please pray for me that I won't become inwardly focused on the needs of my family and start ignoring the needs of others. May God bless you richly so that you can bless those that God has placed in your heart.